house I lived in was not big or impressive, but it was mine. Every crack in the wall, every faded corner, carried years of effort, sacrifice, and love. I had spent most of my life there, learning how to survive after loss, learning how to smile even when things were hard, learning how to be strong for my child. That night started like any other. Quiet, ordinary, forgettable. Kay had finished cleaning and was getting ready to sleep when a strange smell reached me. At first, I thought it was nothing, maybe old wiring, maybe something from outside, but the smell grew heavier, sharper. My chest tightened. When I opened the door, fear hit me like a wave. Fire was already spreading. Not a small flame I could stop. It was moving fast, climbing the walls, cracking the ceiling. For a moment, my body froze. My mind couldn't think. Then instinct took over. I ran. No shoes, no bag, no memories in my hands. Just my life. Neighbors shouted. Someone called the fire department. Someone held my arm. I don't remember their faces clearly. All I remember is standing on the street, wrapped in a thin blanket, watching flames consume everything I owned. The fire trucks arrived. Water poured. Smoke filled the sky. But it was too late. When the fire finally stopped, my home was gone, reduced to black walls and ashes. I didn't cry. I just stood there, staring, trying to understand how life could change so completely in one night. Everything I had built over years disappeared in minutes. As the sun slowly rose, people returned to their routines. Doors closed. Streets became quiet again. But I stayed there, sitting on the curb, feeling smaller than I ever had before. That's when the truth hit me. I had nowhere to go. No house, no clothes, no savings, no plan. I took out my phone. It still worked. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through contacts. Friends had families, relatives lived far away, and then I stopped at one name, my son. The boy I had raised with everything I had, the one I had protected, supported, and believed in, the one I stayed strong for even when life was breaking me up. Mother doesn't think twice in moments like these. I called him. He answered, his voice sleepy, confused. I told him what happened. I kept my voice calm. Didn't want to scare him. I didn't want to sound weak. There was silence on the other end. Then he said, "Mom, come here. We'll talk." Those words gave me hope. I borrowed a ride and went to his place with nothing but the clothes I was wearing. My heart was heavy, but my faith was strong. I kept telling myself, this is what family is for. This is what children do for their parents. When he opened the door, I saw shock on his face. He looked at me, at my tired eyes, at my burned hands. I started explaining everything, how fast it happened, how I lost everything, how I didn't know where else to go. I waited for him to hug me. I waited for him to say, "You're safe now." But instead, he stepped back. He told me his wife wouldn't be comfortable. He told me the house was small. He told me it wasn't the right time. His words were polite, careful, almost kind, but their meaning was cruel. I understood I wasn't welcome. Something broke inside me at that moment. The fire had taken my home, but this had taken my heart. Still, I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I simply nodded and said, "It's okay." I turned around and walked away. Each step felt heavier than the last. The street looked unfamiliar. The world felt colder. I realized then that losing a house is painful, but losing the place you thought you belonged hurts even more. That night, I sat alone, exhausted, empty, and silent. But deep inside, a small voice whispered something I didn't want to hear yet. This is where you decide who you really are. That night, I didn't sleep, not because I had nowhere to lie down, but because my mind refused to rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flames. Every time I opened them, I felt the weight of rejection. The kind that doesn't shout, doesn't insult, but quietly tells you that you no longer belong. I found a small temporary shelter by morning. It wasn't comfortable, but it was safe. A narrow bed, white walls, the smell of disinfectant in the air. I sat there, holding my hands together, staring at the floor, trying to make sense of my life. I kept replaying my son's words in my head. He didn't say anything cruel. That was the hardest part. He spoke calmly, reasonably, as if refusing his own mother was just another practical decision. And maybe, in his world, it was asterisk, but in my world, it felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. Asterisk, for the first time, I asked myself a painful question. Had I raised him wrong? Had I loved him too much? Had I taught him to chase comfort instead of responsibility? The questions hurt, but I didn't allow them to turn into bitterness. Asterisk, because bitterness is heavy, and I was already carrying too much. Asterisk, days passed slowly. I wore the same donated clothes. I ate simple food. I avoided mirrors because I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. She looked older, smaller, tired, in a way sleep could not fix. Asterisk, but something else was growing inside me, determination. One afternoon, I watched a woman at the shelter leave early every morning and return late in the evening. She looked exhausted, but one day, I asked her where she went. She told me she cleaned offices downtown. It wasn't easy, she said, but it gave her dignity. That word stayed with me. Dignity. Asterisk, the next morning. I asked around. I found small jobs, cleaning, organizing, helping where help was needed. The pay was little. My body ached. My hands burned. But every dollar I earned felt like proof that I still mattered. Asterisk, each day, I stood a little straighter. Asterisk, at night, when the shelter grew quiet, I thought about my life. I realized something important. Waiting for someone to save me was slowly breaking me, but taking responsibility for my own survival was healing me. Asterisk, I stopped checking my phone for messages from my son. Asterisk, not because I hated him, but because I needed to choose myself for once. Asterisk, weeks turned into months. My routine became my strength. Wake up early, work, save, rest, repeat. There were days I wanted to give up. Days when loneliness felt heavier than hunger. But every time I thought about quitting, I remembered the night I walked away from my son's door with nothing. Asterisk, I had survived that. I could survive this too. Eventually, I saved enough for a small room. It wasn't much. One window, one bed, one table. But when I closed the door behind me for the first time, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Control. I sat on the floor and cried, not from sadness, but from relief. I had built something again, with my own hands, with my own strength. Asterisk, that night I looked at my reflection and spoke softly, almost afraid to believe my own words. You are not finished. And for the first time since the fire, I believed it. Life didn't suddenly become easy just because I had a small room and a little stability. The struggle was still there, waiting for me every morning. But now, it no longer felt like I was drowning. I was swimming slowly, painfully, but forward. Asterisk, I woke up before sunrise each day. The city was quiet at that hour, as if it was giving me a moment to breathe before the noise returned. I made simple meals, counted my money carefully, and planned every step. There was no room for mistakes. I couldn't afford them. Asterisk, work became my refuge. Cleaning offices, organizing storage rooms, helping elderly neighbors with small tasks. Nothing was beneath me. Every honest job felt like a reminder that I was still capable, still useful, still alive. Asterisk, there were moments when my body begged me to stop. My back hurt, my knees ached, my hands were rough and cracked. But pain became a language I understood. It told me I was moving, not stuck. Asterisk, sometimes, in quiet moments, memories of my son returned, not anger, just sadness. I wondered if he ever thought about me, if he felt even a little guilt, if he missed me the way I missed the child he once was. Asterisk, but I didn't reach out. Asterisk, I knew that healing couldn't depend on his regret. Asterisk, one evening, while cleaning a small office, the owner stayed late. She watched me work silently for a while, then asked about my story. I didn't plan to say much, but the words came out on their own. The fire, the loss, starting over. She listened without interrupting. At the end, she said something that surprised me. She told me she admired my strength. She said not everyone survives loss with dignity. Then she offered me more regular work, better pay, stable hours. Asterisk, that night, I walked home with tears in my eyes, not from pain, but from gratitude. Someone had seen me, not as a burden, not as a problem, but as a person. Slowly, life began to shift. I bought a second chair, a small lamp, a plant for the window, tiny changes, but each one felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. My room started to feel less like survival and more like home. Asterisk with time, my posture changed. My voice grew steadier. I stopped apologizing for existing. I have realized something powerful. Rejection had forced me to meet a version of myself I had ignored for years. Asterisk the woman who didn't wait, the woman who didn't beg, the woman who built even when her hands were empty. Asterisk one afternoon, while returning from work, I saw my son's name light up my phone. My heart skipped. For a moment, my hands froze. I let it ring, then I answered. His voice sounded different, hesitant, careful. He asked how I was. I told him I was fine. Not dramatically, not angrily, just fine. There was silence again. Then he said he was sorry. Asterisk I closed my eyes. Not because I needed to forgive him, but because I needed to understand myself. I realized his apology didn't change my past, but it didn't need to. I had already changed my future. Asterisk I told him I hoped he was well. I wished him peace. And then I ended the call. That night, I slept deeply. Not because life was perfect, but because my heart was finally calm. The next few months were not dramatic. No miracles, no sudden riches, just quiet progress. And for the first time in my life, I understood how powerful quiet progress could be. Asterisk I settled into a rhythm that belonged only to me. Work, rest, reflection. I stopped measuring my life by what I had lost and started measuring it by what I was building. Each day I woke up knowing I had survived worse than whatever waited for me outside that door. Asterisk people around me began to notice the change. Asterisk the office owner trusted me with more responsibility. Neighbors started greeting me with respect. Some even asked for advice, surprised by my calm strength. I didn't give them big speeches. I simply told them the truth that life breaks everyone, but not everyone chooses to rise. Asterisk inside. Something important was happening. I no longer felt invisible. I began setting small goals, saving more, learning new skills, planning instead of fearing. My mind, once filled with anxiety, slowly made room for hope. Not the fragile kind that depends on others, but the steady kind that grows from self-belief. Asterisk one evening, I sat by my window watching the city lights. I thought about the woman I was before the fire. She had lived for others. She had sacrificed silently. She had believed love meant giving until nothing remained. Asterisk now I knew better. Love should not erase you. Strength does not come from being needed. It comes from knowing you can stand alone. Asterisk the past no longer controlled me. I spoke about my story openly, without shame. The fire had taken my house, but it had also burned away my fear. I had nothing left to prove and nothing left to lose. And then, life tested me again. My son called once more. This time, he asked to meet. My chest tightened, but my voice stayed steady as I agreed. We met at a small cafe. He looked older, tired. His confidence was gone. Asterisk he told me things I hadn't known. Stress, problems, regret. He admitted that turning me away was the biggest mistake of his life. He said he had thought about it every day. I listened quietly, not as a broken mother, not as a rejected woman, but as someone who had healed. When he finished, he looked at me with tears in his eyes and asked if I could forgive him. I didn't rush my answer. I told him, forgiveness wasn't about forgetting. It was about letting go of the weight. I told him I had rebuilt my life, not because of his help, but because I chose myself. He nodded, ashamed. Before leaving, he asked if I needed anything. I smiled. I told him I already had everything I needed. As I walked home that evening, I felt lighter than I had in years. I wasn't carrying resentment anymore. I wasn't carrying expectations either. Asterisk I was free.